If you're looking for homeschool sanity, welcome. I'm Dr. Melanie Wilson, Christian psychologist turned homeschool mom and curriculum author. But I was once so disorganized, I thought I had to quit homeschooling and stop having kids. Now, by the grace of God, I have 6 homeschool graduates. Whether we're discussing parenting, productivity, or practical tips, I pray that this episode is just what you need for happy, healthy homeschooling. Hey homeschoolers, I loved having Dana K. White of A Slob Comes Clean on the podcast to discuss the container concept for clutter. If you missed that one, it's gold. I'll put a link in the show notes. When I heard she had a new book coming out, I jumped at the chance to have her back. I was especially intrigued because the book adds a faith-based perspective she hasn't shared before. Before I play our encouraging chat, I'd like to thank Now Programs for sponsoring the podcast.
When it comes to learning difficulties like dyslexia, lasting change starts with the right approach. At the Morris Center, we go beyond traditional tutoring, offering comprehensive, evidence-based programs that retrain the brain for lifelong success. With over 35 years of experience, we've helped thousands of clients overcome learning challenges in just months, not years. Find out how we can help your child succeed at themorriscenter.com.
Dana, thank you so much for joining me here again on the Homeschool Sanity Show. Before we dive into our topic, which I'm super excited to chat about with you, I would love to know what has been happening with you and your family since we last spoke a couple of years ago.
Wow. My kids are like grown. My youngest left for college in August. We're actually talking right now when she just came home last night for Christmas. So 2 of my kids go all the way across the country to school. So it's been interesting. Yeah, we've my middle son went on a gap year mission trip and then decided to go, far away to school. And then my daughter went far away to school. So we're kind of in a fun phase of life right now where we're not technically empty nesters because literally 2 days after the younger 2 moved out, the oldest said, "Hey, I think I'm going to come home for a little while." And I was like, okay. So, yeah, it's just been, it's that phase of life where you're like, I'm glad I like roller coasters because I because you just kind of are along for the ride, which is so much fun because they are turning into, they're creating their own lives, and it's just fun to get to be along for that ride.
I love that you said that, Dana, because I know when I had little kids, I wanted to push pause because I thought there could be nothing more fun than having young kids at home. And it was a blast. It really was a blast. But I so enjoy this phase of life, which is not that much different than yours. I have an adult son living at home in his first year in his career. And my youngest went to college, not this year, but last year. So, it's just neat to see what your kids do with their careers and their friendships and their hobbies. It's a blast. So
especially like I've always been the person who I love to learn about a new thing, a new aspect of life. And for a lot of my life, it was me deciding what those things were. And now I'm like, well, I sure know a lot about dance and powerlifting and deep sea fishing and things that I never ever even thought I would care about, but because my kids are into these things, I'm like, all right, well, let's learn about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that is exactly it. And I hope that encourages you moms who are listening, who still have young kids and you are still deciding what you're going to get involved in, because it is a roller coaster ride, and I don't really like roller coasters, but this is a fun one.
You might as well buckle up, right?
Yeah, buckle up.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about struggling to get your home in order. And my listeners know, if they've ever listened to me before, really, that this was a huge struggle for me that almost kept me from homeschooling and having more kids. And so you have worked with many women who were like me, who were struggling to get their homes in order. Specifically, what I am hoping that we can focus on today is the role of perfectionism in that. What is the role of perfectionism in the problem with us getting our lives and our homes in particular in order and getting our act together?
Yeah. I just want to be clear. I'm not sure if people heard our previous episode or exactly what we talked about on that one, but I get it because I'm exactly in the place that you're talking about, right? Or I was exactly in that place, right? Like that is my story, that I was completely overwhelmed, felt incapable of, getting my house under control, even though I had tried and tried and tried. So as far as perfectionism goes, it's tough because here's what I always say basically on everything is if identifying perfectionism helps you to make progress in your home, if identifying that, because for a lot of us that is the issue, right? Is we think, well, I can't do it perfectly, so I'm either, I don't know that we say I'm not going to do it, but we are waiting for the time when we can do it perfectly, right? Like when my kids are older, when we have a bigger home, when, all the perfect situation, everything comes together at exactly the right time, that's when I'm going to wait, right? So if that helps you, then it's very important to identify that and, separate it. For me, the reason I don't necessarily focus in on perfectionism as the reason that my house was out of control is that I am a perfectionist in other areas. So I know the drive that makes no sense to anybody else of why I have to like keep working and keep working and keep working and then keep working some more, for me, I go, okay, what is it then? Because I am very much of the mindset of, okay, I'm going to wait for the better time. I'm going to wait for the next phase of my life. I'm going to wait until, which for me ended up being thinking, I had always assumed that once I was married and I cared about my house, that's when it would be easy, right? Like I was waiting for that as the perfect time. Okay, that's when I'll get my house under control, even though I'd had a messy space my entire life, every space that I ever lived in. No matter how much my roommates would say, oh, it's okay, I'm neat enough for both of us. And I'd be like, we'll see. And not that I wanted to be that way, but I ruined so many roommates, poor things. But I honestly believed when I had children and had nothing else to do but work on my house, which is a joke, right? We all know. Then it would be easy, right? Like, so I think it's that waiting for the time when it's going to be easy. It's not necessarily going to ever get to a point where it's easy, right? For me, this book that I've written now is about the spiritual side of things for me. And the perfectionism idea comes in that I was waiting for my brain to change or my circumstances to change and be able to do this thing easily, right? When in reality, the thing that actually allowed me to change was accepting that my brain works differently from the brains of people to whom this stuff comes easily, right? And so accepting that, you know what? My brain, as far as somebody who wants to keep their house under control, my brain is not perfect. And it is not easy for me. But also, God designed me with this brain on purpose. So therefore, it is the perfect brain for me, right? Like this is the one. This is who God made me to be. My brain works differently. We celebrate, right? Like if you have multiple kids, you celebrate their uniqueness. You celebrate how they're different from one another. It wouldn't be fun if everybody thought and did things exactly the same way. That's the beauty of our uniqueness, and God designed us with that uniqueness. And so accepting that, okay, God's design of my brain is perfect, even though that means this is not my natural thing that I'm great at. But the thing I realized as I worked on my own home and I was writing about it, and I was finding, much to my shock, that there were other people who struggled the way that I did, that I have a creative brain, and that was the common thread I was seeing among the people who struggled with house stuff. And I went, oh, okay. So the creativity that God designed in me, that I am so incredibly thankful for, that I've always been thankful for, right? Like, I love that. Thank you, God, for making me creative. That is directly related to these struggles that I have in my home, right? And so acknowledging that, it is the thing that freed me to say, okay, well, that doesn't mean that my house is doomed. It actually gives me the freedom to make progress in my house, because I'm like, you know what? God made me this way. So there's a way, but it's different from the way that the person who God designed to have a naturally organized brain, the way it works for them, but they're usually the ones writing about this stuff, right? Like, they're the ones who like to talk about it. And so they write about it. And so I would read that and think, so that's what you have to do. And I would try, and it wouldn't work. And so anyway, a lot of it comes down to accepting that God's design of me, He did not make a mistake. This is how He wanted me to be. And that takes the shame away, which then allows me to move forward and figure out what does work in my home.
I'm so glad that you used that word, shame, because I think so many of us, I know I was absolutely there, are ashamed of the states of our homes. We don't want people to surprise us, to come in. And if they did surprise us and they went into a dirty bathroom, we would just be dying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
At least I would be.
Absolutely.
I have been. So what is the problem with the shame that we often have about our homes?
Well, I think it's, the reality of the creative brain is that we see the world differently, right? We have a unique ability to be able to throw ourselves into a project at the expense of everything else, which the world needs that, right? The world needs people who can throw themselves into a project and not worry about all the little things that might keep you from being able to actually tackle the project. So that's a great thing, right? But we end up throwing ourselves into a project, ignoring these things, or just not even seeing them, not even realizing that. I always say I don't see incremental mess, right? Like, I see perfectly clean. Oh, I love it. And oh my word, what happened? But I didn't see how it happened, right? I didn't see it happening. The doorbell rings or somebody says they're coming over, and I'm like, what? And it just all of a sudden is visible to me, So there's that. What was the question? I'm sorry.
No, that's perfect. And that is a great example of how our brains work, right?
I know, right?
So what is the problem with our natural tendency to react with shame about how our brains work?
Right. So there's that. That is reality. That is a actual challenge, and it's embarrassing to have that happen. Here's where the real problem comes in, is when we put a spiritual spin on that shame.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Because this is a legitimate challenge. I struggled my whole life, right, with this. Then the reality is, a lot of times when this stuff is talked about by Christian women, whether they mean it or not, okay, whether they intend it to be taken this way or not, I would take it as, oh, so as a Christian woman, this is supposed to be easy for me, and instead it feels impossible for me. So now I not only have it's natural embarrassment, right? For your toilet to be dirty and somebody comes over. I mean, that's just normal, right? You're like, ah! Okay. But when we put a spiritual spin on that, where I go, okay, I already feel completely bewildered by this thing. And now I feel like I am failing as a Christian.
Mm.
Then that's where the real shame and the need to hide comes in, because it's like, this doesn't make any sense to me. I hear people talk a lot about this same subject from the other perspective of perfectionism, being like those who can't stop cleaning the house, like who see one bit of, dirt, or, one pair of dirty underwear, hanging on the stair railing or whatever. And they're, I'm just kidding. But, and they're just like, oh, but I can't stop, I can't stop cleaning. I can't stop cleaning. And then hearing, God showing them, I have never been looking at that. I am looking at your heart. I love you. And they say, oh, that helps me relax. I would hear that same story. And there is so much value in that story for a lot of people. But for me, and for the people like me, I hear that same story and I think, well, I would love to have that problem. But what does he think about me when it's not an issue of me needing to let up on the perfection in my home? It's an issue of I am actually incapable of doing this. So it made me feel inherently flawed. And that shame was intense.
Absolutely. Because I think that is connected to some of the lies that you say that we believe about our messy homes. And I want to get to that in a second. But before we do, I want to ask you why you are now writing a book about the spiritual side of your journey. You haven't talked about your faith and how it intersects with this topic before. So why now?
Well, I'm a Christian, and it's everything to me. Like it's the defining thing for every aspect of my life, right? Is my relationship with Jesus. And I have never not talked about it, but I've never made it the subject of what I share. And a lot of that comes from the fact that when I started, I started a blog back in 2009 that I thought was going to be a temporary practice blog. It was my compromise to get to start writing, because I wanted to start writing. I wanted to encourage women. God was calling me to write. And yet I felt like I needed to get my house under control first, because it was just consuming me, right? It was such a disaster. So I started writing about that anonymously, did not intend for this to be the thing that I taught anybody ever. Would have thought, well, I did think, if anybody had ever asked me questions, which they started asking me questions pretty quickly, like, how do I do this? And I was like, do not come to me for advice. Why would anybody want advice about house stuff from me? This makes no sense, right? So I worked on my house, and I was expecting God to reveal to me at some point the thing that had been kept hidden from me, the spiritual truth or the Bible verse that I'd never actually read, or something that was going to make me go, I get it now. This is easy and my house is perfect forever. Like, I just assumed I was missing a spiritual truth, right? As I was working on my house, and I was also growing spiritually, because at the same time, about a year before I started the blog, was when I started an intense Bible study where I was truly studying the Bible for myself for the first time ever, right? Like, I had been in church and I had studied the Bible, but not that kind of daily Bible study at the same time. And instead, God was showing me again and again, Dana, I don't care about your house. I care about your heart. And he showed me this is not a spiritual issue. And that was incredibly freeing to me, to know he had made me the way that I was. He was not, I didn't have to get my house cleaned up in order for him to love me, any of that, which is all stuff that I knew, but I really finally understood it spiritually, right? And so that was why my first several books, I didn't include spiritual content, because of what I said before about when you mix in spiritual content with how to get your house under control, it's very hard for the person like me to not then feel like when I fail at this house stuff that I'm not failing spiritually. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I kept those things separate because that's what God was showing me again and again. And through that, I have built a online platform audience business that is based on me teaching these things for the people whose brains work like mine. But here we are. And the most important thing in my life, the only thing that ultimately matters, eternally matters, is my relationship with Jesus. And so I can't not share that, right? Like I want to share that. And it's time for me to do that. But I have also earned this place to speak about this from this perspective, because I think if I had written this book in 2011, when I was 2 years into what I call my deslobification process and I was still figuring it out, and God had showed me this at that point, I don't care about your messy house, I care about your heart. If I'd written it in 2011, I think that it would have been easier for people to do what I think is possible to do when somebody just hears Jesus doesn't care about your messy house. That, oh, okay, so you're saying that I don't have to worry about cleaning up my house. But I've earned the right to say, we're not saying that your house doesn't need to be cleaned up, but I'm also saying that it's not a spiritual issue. But it's like because I've written the other books, because I teach that other stuff, then we're able to take this distinction, this nuanced distinction, and have that conversation, right? Like this book is not about how you need to get your house cleaned up. Also, none of my books are about how you need to, because the people reading my books already want to. And that's the biggest frustration, right? Like that's one source of shame, is that people assume when your house is a disaster that you don't care. And that's incredibly hurtful for the person whose house is a disaster, because I know that I cared desperately. And when someone would say, oh, they must just like living that way, whatever, I know that that's absolutely not true. But when your house looks like that, you can't say, no, I care, because you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I do.
Because the person looking on is like, well, it doesn't look like you care. I'm like, I promise I care. I promise I'm trying. And so I get all of that, and I needed to earn the right to have this nuanced conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think it's wonderful. I'm really excited about it. And I think so many women who also love Jesus and have Jesus at the center of their life and also have brains that work like ours, I think are going to be really liberated.
I hope so.
And, that is super exciting to me. I mean, and that's what Jesus did for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
He liberated us from the trying,
Yes.
and failing
Yes.
and failing and failing. So I love that parallel that you have. Okay, so now I get to ask you about some of the lies that we believe. And the lies are very important for me to focus on, because as a psychologist, I know that believing lies can lead to all sorts of problems, not just a messy house and being distraught about a messy house. So can you tell us, what are some of the things that we believe, especially when it comes to our faith and our struggle to make order out of chaos in our homes?
Yeah. So, the first one that I think is important to talk about is the idea that cleanliness is next to godliness. That's a phrase that gets thrown around. Most people know that's not in the Bible, because it's one of those that people like to say, did you know that this isn't in the Bible? And people go, oh, yeah. But if you Google it, is cleanliness next to godliness in the Bible? The vast majority of the blurbs will say, no, but the idea is there, but it's commonly believed, but whatever. Um, and I think that's the way that a lot of us take it when we don't really dig in and go, okay, what is this saying and why is it wrong? Right? It is true that God gave us our homes and our spaces to steward, and that they all belong to God, and all of that stuff is true, right? Like when you tell, I would tell my children when they were cleaning up their room, like, well, this is the stuff that God gave us. This is the space and we need to take care of it. And that's all great. Right. But when you let cleanliness is next to godliness be the phrase that is said or the phrase that is believed, then it blurs this line, and it nothing gets us to God. He brings us to him, right? It is grace alone through faith alone, nothing that I do. But if I think that cleanliness is next to godliness, and godliness is kind of a concept that's difficult because it is an issue of giving up my control, right? Which is actually the hardest thing to do, isn't it? I mean, it is for me. It's this realizing, you know what? I have to fully trust and rest in God. It is easier to scrub the bathtub and let that be the thing that makes me feel closer to God, because cleanliness is next to godliness, right? And when I take that away and I say nothing, not even this can. So in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there is the story of Jesus. Really, it's about the first time that he just gets furious with the religious leaders and calls them hypocrites, just calls them out. And I was reading through the Bible in preparation to do this thing. I'd read most of the Bible, but I was like, no, I need to read it beginning to end, which, wow, there's a lot of stuff in there, right? Okay, to deal with. But when I got to this story, I just kind of giggled because I knew I was going to write this book. And I was like, okay, God. Yeah. So I knew that story of him calling them hypocrites, but I hadn't ever had it register what happened to bring about this speech by Jesus. Do you know what it is? I don't know if you've read the book or not.
Are you talking about like the cup,
his disciples were eating with unwashed hands.
With unwashed hands. Okay.
So it is literally an issue of cleanliness. Okay. They're eating with unwashed hands, and the religious leaders are like, oh, why are you letting them eat with, this has to be the disqualifying thing, right? Like they're always looking for a way to disqualify Jesus as a voice of authority that people should listen to. They're like, no. See, look, his disciples are eating with unwashed hands. That goes against the traditions of the elders. And this is the issue that Jesus used to make the distinction between traditions and actual spiritual issues. Okay. So this issue is one where washing your hands before you eat is a really good, really important thing. I mean, I am personally a germaphobe, and I cannot eat the chips and salsa until I have washed my hands after touching the menu. I mean, like so my family knows, I'm always like, oh, can you open it for me? Because they don't mind. And so it doesn't bother me for them. I'm like, can you open the menu? Okay. Can you turn the page? Okay. Yeah.
You don't care if they get the germs.
No, they're fine. They're fine. But I mean, I'm like, it's a real issue. And like washing your hands before you eat, nobody is saying that's a bad thing. He is not saying that's a bad thing. Of course you need to do that. Of course we need to get our houses to where we can live safely and comfortably and all of these things that I've written about for 15 years, right? Like, of course that. But don't make it a spiritual issue. When you make it a spiritual issue, he ends this, speech that he's giving with, You weigh people down with burdens they cannot carry, and you won't lift a finger to help them. Meaning you're adding to their spiritual burden. And it just doesn't play out in the end. It doesn't go with making this a spiritual issue, saying that you have somehow spiritually failed because you haven't done this thing or it's hard for you or whatever, is adding a spiritual shame onto what is already a challenge, right? Let's don't add on to that, because it takes our focus away. And the issue is that, the Proverbs 31 woman, I talk to so many women who tell me they're scared to read that chapter of the Bible. They just don't even want to read it because they're scared, because they're like, well, I can't live up to that. So I tackled it in the book. There's nothing in there about cleanliness. Not one little teeny tiny reference, not using a different word. There's nothing about being organized, about being decluttered, none of that. But there is a lot about how she is very hardworking and not lazy, right? And so people assume that means her house is perfect. Well, a lot of the people whose houses are in, intense states of disarray that I know are some of the hardest working people I've ever known. And that is a big part of the disconnect of, how does my house look like this when I am not a lazy person? It doesn't look like this because I've been laying on the couch doing nothing. Like, I would literally work and work and work and work and work on my house till I was completely exhausted. And then if someone was to come in, they would be like, wow, she must never clean, because I would be scrubbing the floor while every surface was covered in clutter, and so I was trying to get it perfect, but I just didn't understand the things that I now know about what makes the biggest impact and where to put my energy and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so all these things together just bring in so much shame into the picture. And so that's why I just dove in and said, let's talk about this. Let's talk about how this is a lie it needs to be discussed. Instead of just saying, oh yeah, cleanliness is not next to godliness. Let's talk about why. Well, to talk about why, we need to talk about grace. We need to talk about our complete inability to get to God and how he came down for us.
Absolutely. I love that. I am thinking about the statements that you have sprinkled throughout our conversation that are actually good news about being a naturally messy person, which is what I consider myself to be. Although I have learned how not to be, how to be, what I always say is that I am organized enough to do all that God has called me to do.
Exactly.
But one thing I just want to throw in there before I ask you to kind of recap what is good news about being or just having a messy house. How about that? Is I think about a family member. I won't call this family member out. And this person is a naturally messy person, I would say. And I could not love this person more than I do. And the person has these amazing, amazing qualities, and I would never want them to think poorly of themselves, And so I think that gives me a lot of hope and assurance about how I should think about myself. So what are the positives of having this kind of brain, as you say?
Yeah, one of the things I teach people is that I have a project brain. A lot of us have project brains where we do really well at projects. Like, we can plan, execute, evaluate projects better than a lot of other people. And then we look at our homes that are a mess and we think, okay, well, I'm going to do the same thing I do to be able to be successful in other areas of life. I'm going to apply that to my house. And that doesn't work because my house is not a project. It's an ongoing, never ending. There are always new dirty dishes. There are always things. And so what I used to do is I would, spend an entire weekend cleaning the house from top to bottom, not actually decluttering anything. And then I would be like, oh, okay, that's done. And then the next time I even thought about the house, it was back to worse than it was before, which would lead to me being frustrated and, waiting and putting off doing another marathon clean or whatever. So, but that same brain is what allows us to do amazing other things. I was a theater arts teacher. I am highly organized when it comes to people. I used to always say I am really good at organizing people. I just can't organize my things, right? Like that. So those gifts that we're given of being able to drop, being able to be there in someone else's time of need, because it never occurs to me that if I go and help this person, that I won't have time to do my dishes. I'm like, what? Like where I have a wonderful friend who's always there for people too. So I'm not saying she's not. I'm just saying like her first thought is, well, I got to figure out how I will keep my house running smoothly before I take on something else. And I'm like, oh, I'll take on the other thing and never think about that. And those things are different. And the world needs all of us. I generally, when someone will tell me about, oh, this person in their life who's super messy, I'm like, can I make some guesses here? They're really kind. They are super fun to be around, right? And they're highly creative. And they're always like, yes, exactly. And I'm like, yes, that's the reality is that creativity and holding on to stuff go together. Not that everybody who's creative holds on to too much stuff, right? But most people with clutter are highly creative. And we've gathered those things out of this desire to do something creative or helpful to other people or be there in people's times of need. I'll have just the thing when they need it, But then the problem is we just keep doing that with all these great intentions to the point where then we're frozen and we can't find the things when we need it, and we don't have the space to actually do the creative thing and all that. So, yeah.
Right. Which is where your previous books really come into play. I'm definitely going to be linking our previous conversation in the show notes for this episode. You will want to listen to it and you will want to get Dana's other books. But for now, I would love to hear more about what we can find in your new book. Of course, give us the title and tell us where we can get it too.
So it's called Jesus Doesn't Care About Your Messy House, because I'm nothing if not a little bit blunt. We went back and forth on that title, and then finally my editor was like, no, that's exactly what this book is about. So in it, I go through the Proverbs 31 woman, cleanliness is next to godliness. Why does it feel like cleanliness is a spiritual issue? What did Jesus actually say about it? And then in the second half, I go through what have I learned spiritually through these struggles that help me to see these struggles as a gift? Because if they bring me closer to God, then that's a gift, right? And so it helps me appreciate and be thankful for the way that God made me. So, I talk about the container concept and other things, but how that helps me understand God, because a lot of what I do in teaching about housekeeping and decluttering and all that is reality acceptance, just like, okay, let's boil this down to the actual way that things work and what has to be done. Well, God designed things to work the way that they work. And so, we're able to understand him more and his character more through his creation. So yeah, we go into that. But it's fun. I've worked on it for a long time because this is the only thing I've written that actually matters. How that feeling is, even though I'm very, obviously the other stuff matters too, because, there's that need, but if you don't get anything else, understanding that, Jesus doesn't care about your messy house. He cares about your heart. That is it.
Okay. And so where is the best place to get a copy?
Yeah. So anywhere books are sold, all the typical places, it's in all the formats, ebook and paperback and audiobook. You can go to my website, which is aslobcomesclean.com, and find the links there. If you go to aslobcomesclean.com/Jesus, then that will give you any kind of bonuses if this is beforehand, or see if they're still going or whatever, for ordering there. So,
well, that sounds perfect.
thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing with us today. I mean, it has encouraged me too, even though I feel like I know I'm a lot further along in my journey with this issue, but especially when you were talking about how, well, there were a couple of things that I will be pulling out as quotes to share, but the one thing that just really hit me at the end there is when you were talking about some of these people who are like this, they will just drop everything for a friend without even thinking about how it's going to impact their house. And that is definitely me. And that's not something that I want to change. So you encourage me. So thank you so much.
Yeah. We are really fun people.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again. And best wishes with this book launch as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
To find a link to order Jesus Doesn't Care About Your Messy House, Dana's previous appearance on the podcast, and to our sponsor, Now Programs, visit the show notes page at homeschoolsanity.com/messy. Have a happy homeschool week. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I hope something you heard was encouraging. If you have a personal question to follow up, don't hesitate to message me. I'm at Homeschool Sanity on social media. Be sure to check my free resource page at homeschoolsanity.com/resource and find Sanity Saving Curriculum at funtolearnbooks.com. This has been a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network.